questions.
Burning questions.
Insightful answers.
Listener's choice.
With Clement Manyathela.
Today we're discussing something that we have been asking ourselves lots of questions about since the testimony of Brown Mokhotsi yesterday at the Madlanga Commission. Police informants or agents of crime intelligence, is there even a difference between the two? Because he claims to be a police informant, he claims to be an agent of crime intelligence. So we're discussing the role of police informants and how that works. And we've invited Jeremy Veary, who is a former Western Cape head of detectives, someone who understands very well the space, to take any question that you may have around police informants. I mean, these are people who have always been known as sources, right, or confidential informants, and they've played a crucial role in helping law enforcement crack organized crime, crack drug trafficking, gang activity, complex fraud cases, you name it. Men and women who quietly pass information to law enforcement about crimes, syndicates, and dangerous individuals. And what we want to do this hour is to have Mr. Veary explain to you how this works, but also to take any question that you may have about especially what transpired yesterday. Because it looks like sometimes these people have to be involved in criminality. And that's not to suggest that we have now concluded and accepted what Brown Mokhotsi says, that he is in fact a police informant, right? But I think what he has done is bring us to a platform where we can have such important conversations and get clarity from the experts. So you can give us a call if you've got your own questions on 011-883-0702, or you can send us a WhatsApp voice note on 072-702-1702. Mr. Veary, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Yes,
so let's
can you
start
hear me?
maybe with, yes, we can. We can hear you loud and clear. I want us to start by differentiating between a police informant and a contact agent for crime intelligence. What is a contact agent, and is it the same thing as a police informant?
Okay, the only terms we use in the police are an agent, which is a different thing from an informer. An agent is a police officer we send undercover in a covert operation to infiltrate a target group. Okay? That's very important. It's a police officer who we send undercover. Give the person a false identity and take the person off the normal book so that you can't trace the fact that the person is a police officer. And that person's sole job is to gather evidence, given the status undercover as a police officer, that would later be of use to us in a court. Now, an informant is somebody that is a civilian. It's a person who we recruit. Let's say we want to infiltrate a gang, but we cannot send a police officer in there. We will study that particular gang or group and recruit somebody in that environment to do that. The other scenario is we might need somebody to observe somebody for a while and pick up sort of chatter from that person. Maybe the person is in a shebeen and talks a lot. And usually we have an array of people who are what we call invisible people, who just sit around and listen and pick up the noise and then report to us. So it can either be a directed process in an infiltration or penetration operation, or it can be a generic kind of opportunity informant. But the distinction is it's a civilian. However, as regards both, they are not loosely managed. They are governed by inside the police, but by what we call National Instruction 1 of 2021. Now, in terms of that infrastructure, an informer has an administrative file, and that is where his real identity is, his or her, and it has usually a registration code or a number that is used as reference. Okay? The second file is an operational file. That is where everything that an informer gives us and the tasks of a handler to that informer or police gets recorded and kept record of. The common name for that in the old terms was a production file. So you cannot really be an official informant or police agent without being managed through national instruction or administrated via the instructions, the provisions of National Instruction 1 of 2021. And you will have those two files to prove. Now, why do we need to prove that? You know, often people go to court and they say, look, I gave information to this and I was involved in this particular crime, robbery, for example. Now, many people can say that, but it wouldn't. The system would not give it protection for the following reason. Okay. Firstly, before an informant or police agent is going to get unwittingly maybe or perchance involved in something that might amount to a crime, the handler ought to know, and then the handler via CI or organized crime unit or the police applies with the NPA or the Attorney General's office, the NPA, under the Criminal Procedure Act Section 252A for such an agent or such an informer to engage in an undercover operation. And the objective is clear: to prevent or detect or investigate a particular crime, and must get authority for that purpose. So you cannot, you can even be an informant and an agent, but if you don't have any authority and you go and, for example, participate in the robbery, if you are caught by other police members, you will not be covered because you do not have Section 252A authority for that. So those are the technical things in the police that are important to remember. Nobody can just say, I am this. There must be proof that you are this. And that's
so important.
It's in the national
So I was saying that what you've just indicated is so important. It gives us the necessary context. Here's where my confusion is, Mr. Veary, because you've mentioned that you've got to be registered, and there's almost like a file that also exists, because the police must be able to prove that this is a person who does have this handler and this is the information that has been provided before. On the case of what we saw yesterday, for instance, we've got someone who testifies, who even mentions who their handler is, mentions their name, and the commission confirms that, well, they interviewed the person's handler the previous day, but the police don't want to come out and confirm whether or not the person is indeed an informant or an agent with crime intelligence. So the question then is, are the police allowed to reveal that? Because I can understand if the police won't say beforehand that, oh, that person is our informant, that person is and maybe forget agent, because Brown Mokhosi was not even a police officer. Let's say police informant. Can the police, though, come and confirm that this person is telling the truth, or this person is lying? We don't have any records of him. Because that's been my confusion when I've been trying to get the police yesterday to tell us whether or not it's true. Do they have a file of this person? They're not able to come and confirm or deny that. So is it against the law to do that?
Personally, then, in a matter of profession, as a professional, I was in that environment and ran undercover offices and operations before. We never concede that a person is an informer, because if we do that unilaterally, it will affect our ability to recruit people in future to work for us as informants. So firstly, as a matter of operational practice, you do not reveal the identity of them. It's just a professional issue. However, if an informant goes and reveals in law, and there is case law to that effect, if an informer reveals his or her own identity, okay, then that process does not necessarily apply, that proviso. Now, in the case of Brown, he went to the commission and he identified and says he was an informant. Okay? So now we come to the latter realm and the question that you asked. Now, in that particular case, okay, we now have to weigh up. If he was an informant in what we call the open account, okay, where he was handled by a member who is on the books and not part of the undercover office or whatever, etc. If that was the case, then such a member can come forward, can be asked by the judge in camera to come and discuss and confirm or not. But that is not only a verbal process. Because, you know, informants claim a lot of things that they did things on instruction of people. But the only proof is what I said before, that production file. If there's no task in that production file that speaks to what the informer claims he did for crime intelligence, then that informer was on a frolic of their own and would not be covered by protection. Or if there was no 252A authority, if that informer was involved in a criminal act and there was no 252 authority, that informer would not be covered. So everything will be clarified now that Brown has revealed himself as that, or claims he is that, by whether or not such by the file. And that can be heard in camera by the police. Now that is if the informer works in an open office, work for a handler in the open offices of crime intelligence. If it worked for the undercover officers, and I want to explain that, the undercover office, even the police officers who work there are not identified on the system as police officers. So if somebody goes and says, I work for a person B, that person might be working for person B under a false identity, and that false identity might be essential to that person's work in the undercover office that police officers work. Now then, obviously, one must then weigh up. This chap is exposed on a frolic or on his own volition something. Are we now going to say we're going to compromise in the long time an undercover police officer in the undercover office for a situation where a person was just doing something willy-nilly on a frolic of their own? We cannot, because that officer might be handling more other sources. That officer might be involved in other operations on which that person's identity as a police officer is entirely secret. So yes, you must now weigh up, but it all depends on who, Brian, did he work for the open office of crime intelligence? In other words, the ones where the officers you see, or did he work for the undercover officers, which are usually some front organization or some front company? So those are the things, but all of this, crime intelligence, the head or whoever must come and give an answer. I would be very hesitant if I was a commanding officer in that environment to go send my handlers to any court process. I would rather say, if I'm the senior officer, I would go and take certain evidence to the commission with the production files and in camera confirm. And in camera clarify to the Matlanga Commission, look, this is the task the person received. This is what the person is, so that the commission has a clear understanding of when informers step out of line, because informers do step out of line. It's a normal risk in our business.
Yes, and after the break, I want you to explain to us then, how do you then deal with a situation when informers do step out of line? Because often there must also be this balancing act when these informants are themselves involved in crime. So how do detectives then decide whether the value of the information outweighs the risks? We'll look into that after the break. I've got some questions as well coming from our listeners on 011-883-0702. WhatsApp's on 072-702-1702. It's 23 minutes after 11.
Burning questions.
Insightful answers
Listener's choice.
with Clement Manyathela.
25 minutes after 11 o'clock. Fascinating conversation on our Listener's Choice feature this morning around the role of police informants. Jeremy Veary, who is a former Western Cape head of detectives, has really done a brilliant job at helping us understand how they normally informants operate and the registration that's required, the file that must be kept, the production file. Is it part of the open office or is it undercover? What happens now? I want him to explain to us what happens when informers do step out of line. But you're welcome to bring your own questions on 072-702-1702. I see a few of them that I'll put to Mr. Veary. But let's first start with the issue you raised before the break, Mr. Veary, around informers who do step out of line. And I said earlier that sometimes these informants are themselves involved in crime and they can come back and claim, well, I was doing that because, I wanted to get this kind of information. I know you've already said that that must be planned and the NPA must be notified. But when they step out of line, like what options are there for the police, for law enforcement, or even for the handler?
Firstly, when they step out of line, whether they actually get involved in the commission of crime or the conspiracy, in other words, the decision-making or that part of the chain, without authority, then they are liable to be arrested for that particular offense. It's as simple as that, because they did not have the Section 252 authority to do what they do, and therefore when they're arrested, they will not be covered in a court, in a trial. So it's as simple as that. However, things are often rapidly unfolding, And I want you to, yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
We're listening, Mr.
Are you
Veary.
listening? Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember, I want to use an example. In the days of Paget in the Western Cape, and you should read a brilliant book about handling informers and these challenges, written by a chap who worked with me called David Africa. It's called Lives on the Line, one of the sterling handlers in that particular time against Paget. He deals with a lot of these challenges, and you can read it for background. But, in situations where something on the spur of when happen, your informer is forced into a particular situation, and your informer can prove that as soon as possible, as after that, they got to you and you managed to contact the NPA and say, look, unfortunately, I'm sitting with a situation. Then that needs to be reported as required. And then the NPA needs to be considered. Like in that particular case, there was a case of an informer in a particular cell, I remember, and that cell was going to do 3 or 4 attacks. But the instructions were almost immediate. So after the first attack, the informer happened to get away and contact the handler. But rapidly they were going to do the next particular attack or assassination of a gangster, and another bomb would be placed. But in that particular time, there was an emergency protocol that we could use. But if an informer just goes on and on and on and continually does that, he or she would not be covered in that particular context. So when informers step off the line, that is the challenge. I want to use another scenario. In this Modak matter, Modak also claimed he's an informer. But when we looked into it, he was handled by rogue crime intelligence officers in the province who worked directly for him to manufacture false cases against police officers who were investigating MODAC and planting the information that they would collect with the Sunday Times and those particular things, which placed the Sunday Times in a very embarrassing position because they had to apologize. But because they did that, they were easily then discovered afterwards. So in that particular case, MODAC could not be covered for whatever nonsense he kept up to. And today, those of us so affected are testifying in that particular matter and saying he committed a crime. He gave false information under oath to police officers wittingly, and those police officers wittingly acted on that in order to discredit other police officers. And they are as liable for the crime as the informant. So yes, there are strict checks and balance. I'm not saying everything is perfect, but Section 252A and our National Instruction 1 of 2021 are good safeguard measures to protect us in the event of errant informers.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy Veary, thank you so. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Thank you so much for making time for us. Jeremy Veary is the former Western Cape head of detectives, and I'm definitely that was enlightening for me. I hope it was to you too. It now 11:32.